When Cris Carter publicly called for Dillon Gabriel to be traded, it wasn't a throwaway line. It was a statement loaded with finality. Just months ago, Gabriel was considered a viable contender in the Browns' quarterback room. But that door slammed shut the moment SHEDEUR Sanders was named the 2026 starter. Carter, once one of Sanders' fiercest critics, now insists Gabriel has no future with the team and won't matter in this league.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
That pivot came swiftly after Carter watched Sanders silence doubters with poise, precision, and professionalism, qualities that have now elevated him to face of the franchise status. Gabriel's displacement marks more than a depth chart adjustment. It highlights the force of Sanders' rise. Backed by team leadership and buoyed by performance under pressure, Sanders has flipped the narrative entirely. The Browns' choice to cut ties with old assumptions and hand the reins to SHEDEUR reflects not just his personal growth, but a changing standard for how quarterbacks are evaluated. One where quiet consistency wins out over pedigree and preseason hype. So now, let's talk about what this moment really means. Because Cris Carter didn't just offer some quiet apology behind closed doors. He said it publicly, directly, and without deflection. "I'm mature. I made a mistake." Those were his words. And they hit different when they're coming from someone who, just months ago, was at the forefront of the SHEDEUR isn't NFL material campaign. It wasn't subtle. Carter called SHEDEUR a fifth-round pick, not a day two guy with potential, not a developmental piece, a fifth-rounder. And for what? A lack of ideal size? Arm strength that didn't wow him? Athleticism that wasn't elite? He didn't just critique the game. He went after the mentality, the toughness, even the development, throwing shade at Deion Sanders for supposedly coddling his own son. That's how deep the doubt ran. But now, the Browns have done what no critic can argue with. They named SHEDEUR Sanders the starting quarterback for the 2026 season. Not a backup. Not a rotational option. QB1. The face of the offense. The guy the organization is building around. And just like that, the hot takes from the past year started to collapse. Carter's apology isn't just about correcting a personal opinion. It's damage control. It's a public acknowledgement that he got it completely wrong, and not in a way that can be brushed off. Because when you go on national platforms and question someone's work ethic, leadership, and readiness, and then that same person proves you wrong in every single category, the only move left is humility. That's what this is. Carter admitting he underestimated Sanders, and doing so because Sanders has now made it impossible not to admit it. The Browns have made their choice, and that choice is backed by action. They didn't just plug Sanders into a struggling system. They reshaped the system around him. They fired Kevin Stefanski, reset the coaching strategy, and committed to a new direction with SHEDEUR at the center. You can't fake that level of endorsement. That's not about hype or legacy or name recognition. That's about trust. A billion-dollar franchise just made it clear. SHEDEUR isn't here to prove himself anymore. He's already done that. He's here to lead. And suddenly, all those media narratives about how unproven or overhyped he would start to feel hollow. Especially when you look at how they were built in the first place. It wasn't based on poor play. It was based on projections that leaned too heavily on physical measurables and not enough on leadership, IQ, and actual game tape. That's where Carter and others went wrong. And now, we're watching the cleanup in real time. Because it's not just Carter. He's just the most vocal name to flip. Rex Ryan? Walked it back. Tony Grossi? Shifted tone. Mary Kay Cabot? No longer circling with the same skepticism. The retractions aren't loud, but they're there. Because SHEDEUR's performance has left them no room for anything else. There's something really telling about that. Once the Browns committed to him, officially, publicly, it made it harder for anyone to maintain their previous stance without sounding out of touch. And once Carter came forward with that apology, it broke the dam. If even he is saying he was wrong, where does that leave the rest? Here's the real twist. SHEDEUR didn't demand this apology. He didn't address the criticism head-on. He didn't post subtweets or call anyone out by name. He did something way more effective. He let his performance speak. Throughout the scrutiny, SHEDEUR stayed composed. No drama. No rebuttals. Just game after game of steady improvement. That's what set this apart. When you're facing personal attacks, staying quiet isn't weakness, it's strategy. And SHEDEUR played it perfectly. His maturity made the critics look small. His play made their takes look outdated. That's why Carter's now calling for Dillon Gabriel to be traded. Think about how fast that pendulum swung. From SHEDEUR isn't NFL ready to get Gabriel out of the room. He's not part of the future. That's not just a change of opinion. That's a full surrender. A statement that Sanders is clearly the guy, and there's no reason to pretend there's still a battle happening. That's how powerful performance is. And the comparison to Gabriel only sharpened it. Week after week, SHEDEUR separated himself. Leadership, accuracy, pocket presence. All the things that don't show up in a 40-yard dash time but win football games. SHEDEUR showed all of it. And now the Browns are all in. It's wild how fast narratives unravel when teams start making real decisions. You can call a guy unready all you want, but once the organization names him the starter and makes it very clear that they're building around him, the story changes. You start hearing new words in the media: poise, command, intangibles. Funny how those didn't matter before. But when the evidence becomes undeniable, the language shifts. Suddenly, it's not about where SHEDEUR came from, but where he's going. And all roads now lead to him being the guy in Cleveland. Let's not lose sight of the fact that this isn't just about talent. It's about professionalism. While analysts were digging into his background, debating whether Deion was helping or hurting him, SHEDEUR just kept showing up. No excuses, no distractions, just growth. That emotional intelligence, that self-awareness, that's what set him apart. It wasn't just the stats, it was how he carried himself. And when a player consistently avoids conflict, stays focused, and keeps improving, that forces people to reevaluate. Now Carter is on record calling SHEDEUR a leader, giving him credit for controlling the offense. Talking about maturity. That's a full rebrand. And it's not happening in a vacuum. It's part of a broader shift, one where credibility is on the line. Because when you're a public analyst, you can't afford to be on the wrong side of history for too long. Audiences notice. And staying stuck in a bad take can make your whole brand look dated. So Carter adjusted. Fast. You could call it damage control. You could call it growth. Either way, it's happening because SHEDEUR made it happen by simply being excellent. The best part? SHEDEUR never asked for any of this. He didn't campaign for the role. He didn't demand validation. He just proved himself. Consistently. And once the Browns gave him the reins, it sent a signal not just to the locker room, but to the entire football world. This isn't a tryout anymore. This is his team. So now the same voices that tried to bury him early are having to dig their way back to relevance by changing their tone. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. How fast respect shows up when you force people to watch your work. Performance overrides perception. Always has, always will. And right now, SHEDEUR Sanders is the living, breathing example of that truth. So if you've been following this arc from the beginning, you already know this isn't just some media apology. It's a narrative collapse. A reset of everything they thought they knew about this quarterback. And now that the Browns have made it official, everyone else is scrambling to catch up. If you're here for the chaos, the flip-flops, and the poetic justice of watching a quarterback rewrite his story without saying a word, hit that like button. Drop a comment if you remember who counted him out first. And hit subscribe. Because if this is what SHEDEUR did before his first full season as QB1, the next chapter is going to be even louder. And let's be clear, this is exactly what makes the story so satisfying. It's not just that SHEDEUR Sanders was underestimated. It's that he was actively doubted, openly criticized, and publicly dismissed by people who built their careers off being the gatekeepers of NFL legitimacy. Cris Carter didn't just say SHEDEUR wasn't ready. He said SHEDEUR didn't belong anywhere near the top of the draft. He told audiences that this kid was a mid-to-late round project, a guy with holes in his game and too much protection from his father to really grow. That wasn't just wrong. It was personal. And now, the receipts are aging like unrefrigerated milk. Because here's what the critics didn't account for: time, improvement, growth. They wrote off SHEDEUR before he even stepped onto an NFL field, before he had a pro snap, before the preseason tape, before the Browns made the decision to hand him the keys. They had already filed him under overhyped. But the thing about performance is that it doesn't care about predictions. Week after week, SHEDEUR delivered. He made the throws they said he couldn't. He extended plays they said he wasn't athletic enough to survive. He commanded the offense like a veteran. He didn't flinch. He didn't fold. He didn't do anything they said he would. Instead, he did the one thing no one in the media can spin. He won the job. On merit. In a league that's ruthless to young quarterbacks, especially the ones who don't fit the traditional mold. And now, the Browns are sending a very loud message. Not only are they starting SHEDEUR in 2026, they're building around him. This isn't a wait-and-see experiment. This is a full franchise pivot. Fire the head coach, restructure the system, push out any lingering competition. It's all happening because SHEDEUR didn't just prove he could play. He proved he could lead. And for people like Cris, that creates a problem. You can't keep pretending someone doesn't have it when the NFL team with the most on the line just said, "He's our guy." So what does Carter do? He apologizes. He says, "I'm mature. I made a mistake." And, to be fair, that takes something. Most analysts will bury their old takes or move the goalposts until you forget. Carter actually said the words. He didn't hedge. He didn't spin. He just owned it. But make no mistake, he had to. Because if he hadn't, the audience would have called him out anyway. There's only so long you can double down on a bad take when the whole world sees the opposite playing out. Eventually, you either pivot or become irrelevant. Carter chose to pivot, and now he's praising SHEDEUR's leadership, talking about his command of a huddle, saying the Browns should immediately trade Dillon Gabriel because there's no longer a debate about who the future is. That's not just an apology. That's a full recalibration. And honestly, that's the story of this entire arc. All these analysts, all these insiders who scoffed at the idea of SHEDEUR being a franchise quarterback, they're watching their old clips back with a nervous laugh. Because it turns out the kid they said was all flash, all hype, protected by daddy, not tough enough, not strong enough, is now the face of $1 billion rebuild. Let that sit for a second. This is a player who was called soft by professionals. A player who was told he was only in the spotlight because of his last name. A player who had his character, his work ethic, and even his toughness questioned by people who had never spent a single day in his locker room. And what did SHEDEUR do? He didn't respond with tweets. He didn't go on podcasts clapping back. He didn't drop merch with "They doubted me" slogans. He went to work. Quietly. Relentlessly. Professionally. That's what made the reversal inevitable. Not the talent alone. Not the coaching change. But the composure. SHEDEUR showed more maturity than most of the people paid to talk about him. And now every single person who dismissed him has two options. Admit they were wrong or keep pretending the obvious isn't happening. Cris chose option 1. And while that won't erase what he said, it's at least a step toward rebuilding the credibility he risked when he made it personal. But even in the apology, there's a subtext. When Carter calls for Dillon Gabriel to be traded, he's doing more than endorsing SHEDEUR. He's sending a message. This isn't a two-quarterback team anymore. There's no controversy, no rotation, no fallback plan. The Browns have picked their leader, and they're clearing the runway. That's rare in the NFL. Most teams play it safe with young quarterbacks. They hedge. They say things like, "He still needs to earn it," or "We're going to let the competition play out." But the Browns didn't do that. They went all in. And in doing so, they forced everyone else to get in line or get left behind. That's why you're seeing this wave of retractions from other analysts. Rex Ryan, Tony Grossi, Mary Kay Cabot. They were all skeptical. Some of them were downright dismissive. And now they're either softening their tone or rewriting the narrative entirely. It's not because SHEDEUR changed who he is. It's because the tape doesn't lie, and neither do the decisions coming from inside the building. When an NFL team hands over the playbook and says, "We're building around you," it's no longer theoretical. It's happening. And for SHEDEUR, it's the ultimate response. He didn't need to prove the haters wrong with words. He did it with results. And now, those same critics are rebranding their narratives, so fast you'd think they never said anything negative to begin with. But we remember. We remember who said he was a product of nepotism, who said he couldn't adjust to NFL speed, who said he'd crumble without Dion holding his hand. And now those voices are dead quiet or apologizing, like Cris Carter. This story isn't just about redemption. It's about accountability. In an industry where takes are thrown out like fast food wrappers, rarely cleaned up, we're finally seeing what it looks like when performance forces a reckoning. Because that's what SHEDEUR Sanders has done. He turned doubt into silence, criticism into concession, and hype into reality. The Browns didn't name him QB1 because of vibes. They did it because he earned it. And now every step forward he takes is a reminder that the people who tried to box him in never really saw the full picture. So whether you believed from the beginning or you're just now catching up, what we're seeing is the blueprint for how young athletes can shift the conversation. Not by screaming into the void, but by staying locked in, focused, unshaken. SHEDEUR Sanders didn't change. The world around him did. And now that he's running the Browns offense in 2026, those same people who said he wouldn't last are lining up to praise him. That's not coincidence. That's proof. Performance always wins. And now here we are. A full-blown quarterback saga that started with mockery and ends with silence, from the critics at least. But make no mistake, this isn't just another sports story that quietly wraps up with a neat little bow. What we're seeing is one of the sharpest media U-turns in recent memory. Cris Carter didn't just change his opinion. He threw his hands up and said, "You got me." Because how else do you respond when everything you said about a player, his limitations, his mindset, his toughness, gets completely disproven, one receipt at a time, in front of a national audience? Let's not forget just how far Carter took it before this turnaround. He wasn't cautiously skeptical. He wasn't playing devil's advocate. He was adamant. He said SHEDEUR should be a fifth-round pick. Fifth. That's the range teams look at when they're trying to stash a backup or roll the dice on a practice squad body. Not a future franchise leader. Not the face of an organization. But that's the trap so many media figures fell into. They were evaluating the image of SHEDEUR Sanders, not the game. They focused on the branding, the last name, the off-field confidence, and completely dismissed the work happening behind the scenes. And now that work has forced a reckoning. The Browns have named SHEDEUR QB1 for 2026. It's done. Official. Inked in. The same Browns organization that's been infamous for instability, for quarterback carousel drama, for false starts and bad calls. They've drawn their line in the sand. And they picked SHEDEUR. They didn't hedge. They didn't play it safe. They backed him with personnel moves. They fired Kevin Stefanski. They reshaped the coaching staff. They are building the entire offensive identity around SHEDEUR Sanders. And suddenly, the media voices that spent the last year nitpicking every flaw, they've either gone radio silent or gone soft. Cris Carter chose the latter. He admitted he was wrong, gave SHEDEUR credit, praised his command of the offense, his leadership, and his talent. And then, in maybe the coldest pivot of the entire apology tour, he called for Dillon Gabriel to be traded. Let that sink in. Gabriel, who once was considered a potential competitor for the starting job, just got casually dismissed by a guy who recently didn't even believe SHEDEUR should be drafted anywhere near the top. Carter didn't just backtrack. He jumped ship and declared SHEDEUR the captain. It's not subtle. It's a full endorsement. One that carries weight, especially coming from someone who's eaten his words in front of everyone. But that's what happens when the gap between perception and performance becomes too wide to ignore. You can only keep pretending for so long before reality drags you back. SHEDEUR made that happen. He didn't do it with viral clips or mic drop quotes. He did it with poise, progress, and presence. The kind of presence you can't manufacture. The kind that shows up in every huddle, every third and long, every drive where the pressure's high and the crowd is louder. That's what these analysts missed. They measured arm strength. They listed combined numbers. They critiqued mechanics. But they ignored leadership. They ignored the consistency, the ability to stay unbothered while everyone else screamed about whether or not he was ready. That mental toughness, that emotional discipline, it's what allowed SHEDEUR to navigate the most toxic part of his media cycle without getting baited. While Carter was calling him out on national shows, while other analysts were speculating about his mental makeup, SHEDEUR kept it clean. No clapbacks. No online drama. Just growth. And now the Browns are fully behind him. Not develop him for a year behind him. Not split reps in camp behind him. QB1. You can feel the energy shift. The same people who once laughed at the idea of SHEDEUR being a starter are now wondering if they missed something major. Spoiler alert, they did. But this isn't just about the critics getting it wrong. It's about how fast and how loudly they've had to correct course. That's the part that really exposes the game. Because the minute the Browns made their announcement, the tone flipped. SHEDEUR went from raw project to legitimate leader in less than 48 hours in the public discourse. Not because anything changed in his play, but because the organization finally said what he'd been showing the whole time. He's the guy. And when the franchise speaks, the media listens, whether they want to or not. That's why you're seeing this flood of reversals. It's not just Carter. It's a ripple effect. When a quarterback proves the doubters wrong with results, those who made their names doubting him have two choices: adapt or lose credibility. Rex Ryan? Quiet now. Tony Grossi? Walking it back. Mary Kay Cabot? Not so quick to hit publish on the next doubting headline. And look, people get things wrong. That's not the issue. The issue is how confidently and carelessly those takes were thrown around when the player in question was still developing, still adjusting, still climbing. That's the lesson here. Cris Carter had to go on national television and admit he underestimated a player who did nothing but improve, nothing but work, nothing but play the game right, while the media tried to define him by anything but his performance. The moment the Browns gave SHEDEUR the job, everything changed. Now Carter's not just walking back his take. He's endorsing SHEDEUR, calling for trades, signaling full support. It's a dramatic shift, but it didn't come from nowhere. It came from watching a player do what the hype couldn't, prove it. That's what silences the noise. Not clapping back. Not interviews. Just game. So where does this go next? Well, now that SHEDEUR is officially the starter, the spotlight's not going anywhere. The critics will repackage their narratives. The new talk will be about how he handles a full season, how he adjusts once teams get more tape, how he responds to adversity. The goalposts will move. They always do. But the point is, SHEDEUR already passed the test they said he couldn't. Not just the physical one, but the psychological one. He survived the smear campaign. He stayed professional. And now he's taking the snaps. That's what matters. Cris Carter's apology doesn't change the past, but it does underline the moment. A public reckoning. A rare instance where the sports media machine had to hit reverse. And while that doesn't happen often, it's powerful when it does. Because it reminds everyone watching, young players, fans, and yes, other analysts, that performance will eclipse perception eventually. It just takes a little time and a lot of poise. So, if you've been following this story from the beginning, you already know how satisfying this moment is. Not just because SHEDEUR is finally getting the respect he's earned, but because the people who tried to gatekeep that respect are now rushing to catch up. And if you're just now tuning in, buckle up. Because this story's not over. In fact, it's just getting good. Go ahead. Hit like if you're here for the full circle moments. Drop a comment if you remember exactly who said SHEDEUR wouldn't make it. And smash that subscribe button, because we're only getting started. The NFL has a new QB1, and the receipts are rolling in.